In May 1999, 14-year-old Ah Fong walked into a police station in the Tsim Sha Tsui area of Hong Kong and told confused detectives that she was being haunted by a ghost. Instead of being laughed out of the station, detectives let Fong continue to talk. Fong told officers that she was being followed by the ghost of a woman she had helped to murder. The woman plagued Fong's nightmares, was in the corner of every dark room she entered, and she even heard the woman's screams ringing in her ears. The only solution? Confess to her crime. Police were skeptical until the young girl led them to a third-floor apartment in Hong Kong's Shoppers Paradise on Granville Road. Once inside, they discovered a large stuffed version of the fictional white cat, Hello Kitty, popularized in Japan and then worldwide. But this version of the toy contained more than just stuffing. The stuffed kitty had been crudely sewn shut, and once they opened it, they discovered the skull of 23-year-old Fan Man Yee. Welcome back to Crime A to Z, where we detail cases and criminals from their very beginning until well after other reporting ends. Today we'll be talking about one of Hong Kong's most gruesome killings, commonly referred to as the Hello Kitty murder. Be sure to stick around till the end to hear how prison life differs from most cases we're used to hearing about. Growing up in Hong Kong, Fan Man Yee hadn't had an easy childhood. At a young age, her parents abandoned her, so she was raised in Ma Tau Wai, an all-girls orphanage. Hong Kong's child welfare system at that time, particularly for orphaned young girls, left them in appalling conditions. Between the unforgiving punishments, the unhygienic living quarters, and the limited education, Fan was left in dire straits by the time she was evicted when she turned 16. Left on the streets to fend for herself, Fan developed a drug addiction and became a sex worker. With no home, job, or qualifications, she walked the thin gray line of the law, regularly coming into contact with police for a string of petty crimes committed in order to survive. By 1997, Fan, now 21 years old, found work at a brothel. Due to the loopholes in Hong Kong's prostitution laws, selling sex was legal, but pimping, or acting as an agent for prostitutes and keeping part of their earnings, was not. To get around this, the pimps would buy multiple apartments within a complex and rent out cheap rooms to prostitutes only, calling themselves landlords instead of pimps. This is where Fan was working, believing it to be safer in one of these apartment-turned-brothels than living on the street. Despite feeling safer in an apartment, Fan's clientele ranged from members of the Chinese mafia to outright criminals. By 1996, Fan got a job at the Empress Karaoke nightclub, and that was where she met Ng Chi-yun. By 1997, the pair were wed and had a child together, and Fan was finally living a life free from the streets. Unfortunately, the marriage was not a happy one. The two were both heavy drug users, and neighbors would hear them arguing late into the night, with Chi-yun physically abusing Fan. Wanting to provide a better life for her son, Fan decided to leave Chi-yun and she stopped taking drugs. She also got a job as a nightclub hostess where she would earn more money to be able to provide for herself and her son. While some reports suggest that at this time, Fan was only working as a hostess, earlier reports and witness statements claimed that Fan was still working as a prostitute at the nightclub. After 2 years working at the nightclub, Fan caught the attention of 34-year-old Chang Man Lok, a ruthless pimp, loan shark, drug dealer and a member of the Triads, an organized crime syndicate in Hong Kong. Man Lok often requested the services of Fan and would brag to her about the extensive wealth his illegal professions provided him. It's not known why Man Lok preferred Fan, but for weeks she entertained him and he was eager to receive. That is, until everything went terribly wrong. In March 1999, Fan hit an all-time low. She couldn't afford to feed herself or her son. Desperate for cash, Fan went back to the work that she knew paid well, where she once again encountered Man Lok. As he undressed, she caught a glimpse of his wallet sticking out of his pants. This was her chance. Once they were finished and Manlok got up to get dressed and leave, Fan pocketed the wallet and waited for Manlok to realize it had gone. When he didn't, she breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that Manlok would think he'd left his wallet at home or it had been stolen before or after his visit with her. She reassured herself that this client had taken a liking to her and wouldn't think she could have done such a thing. As Manlok left the nightclub, he headed to the nearest 7-Eleven store to get a drink before continuing with his night. As he went to pay, he realized his wallet was missing. Worried but telling himself he had left it at his apartment, Manlok began walking home before suddenly stopping in his tracks. He distinctly remembered paying Fan with that wallet. He stormed back into the nightclub shouting profanities relating to Fan stealing his money. He started screaming at Fan's locked door, threatening to pull it off of its hinges. Finally, Fan opened the door and admitted she had stolen 4,000 Hong Kong dollars, which roughly equated to around $500. Fan gave Manlok his wallet back. But that wasn't enough. Instead, he demanded she paid interest on what she stole, to the sum of 10,000 Hong Kong dollars, or lose her life. Fan promised to pay but instead fled the brothel and began living on the street again, fearful that Manlok would come after her. When Manlok discovered she had disappeared, he enlisted triad members, 27-year-old Leung Shing-cho and 21-year-old Leung Wai-lun, to track Fan down and bring her to him. After days of searching, the two men found Fan and abducted her, taking her to a third-floor apartment in Shoppers Paradise on Granville Road. Once she was returned to Manlok, he devised a plan for her to pay him back the debt she owed, alongside its ever-increasing interest. Manlok decided to open a brothel, with Fan as the only prostitute. And for punishment for running off, Fan spent her first night in the apartment being brutally beaten and repeatedly raped by Manlok and his two acquaintances, high on methamphetamines. Unfortunately, the horrifying torture was not limited to a single night of drug-fueled barbarism. Fan was subjected to indescribable torment on a regular basis by the group, while still servicing the customers who came to this one-person brothel. Her treatment got worse over time as word got out that there was a prostitute who could be roughed up without her pimp objecting. As she became more and more beaten, bruised, and unable to think straight due to the pain she was in, the more conventional clients who just wanted sex stopped coming by and were replaced by sadistic clients who got off on the sexual abuse they viciously inflicted on Fan. Watching all of this abuse unfold was 13-year-old Ah Fong. Fong had been raised in the slums of Hong Kong. With parents who ostracized her and having had brothers who hated her, Fong ran away from home just before the Lunar New Year in 1998. With no plan and no money, Fong found herself sitting in a cheap restaurant praying for help. Wai-lun, Manlok's triad member, was sitting at the table across from her and came over and introduced himself. He was wearing a fake Armani suit, gold chain and gold bracelet. He introduced himself to Fong by his nickname of Gangster, and the pair quickly began a relationship. Fong stopped going to school and instead turned her admiration toward her new boyfriend and the triad he was involved in. One night, while out at a karaoke bar, Wai-lun introduced Fong to his triad big brother, Manlok, who told her, "You must come and stay at my place." From then on, Fong went with the three men pretty much everywhere. And when they later brought Fan back to torture her, Fong was a willing participant. Fong would burn and beat Fan, jeering as the young woman screamed out in pain. But what Fong did was tame, compared to what the men put her through. Drinking straws were set on fire, and Fan was held down, while the burnt plastic was dripped onto the soles of her feet, leaving her unable to walk. When that got boring, they just set fire to her feet directly instead. And they beat her until she was blue, with anything they could use in the apartment, from water pipes to kitchen utensils. Chili oil was smothered into her wounds, making Fan feel like she was burning from the inside out, and hot oyster sauce was thrown over her face. Fan was forced to smile and laugh throughout the torture, with Fong later recounting, "It was a game they played. If she didn't pretend to be happy, they would beat her harder. They told her to smile while they burned her. It was a fun atmosphere." The men would urinate over her face and into her cuts. And on one occasion, Fong defecated into a shoebox, and then watched, as Fan was forced to eat it in its entirety. If there was nothing good to watch on TV, they would use Fan as entertainment, stringing her up with electrical wire and hanging her from the ceiling. They would beat her with iron bars or pipes until they grew bored and simply left her hanging there overnight. Within a month, the torture was too much for Fan and she was on the edge of death. The brutal beatings had left her bloodied and deformed. As a result, no clients were willing to pay Manlok for services from a half-dead woman lying on the floor. Knowing Fan was dying, none of the 4 perpetrators in the apartment did anything to attempt to save her life. Instead, they hung out together in other rooms, playing video games, watching films and binging on ice, a popular methamphetamine. On April 15, 1999, Manlok, his 2 cronies, and Ah Fong decided to head out for the day. With Fan barely alive, they locked her in a bathroom just in case she made an attempt to escape. When the 4 got back to the apartment hours later, Fong discovered Fan, dead in the bathtub. A foul stench and blood were already emanating from Fan before she died and was even worse now. The group acted fast to try and dispose of the body. Manlok's 2 cronies were tasked with dismembering her body in the bathtub, slicing her flesh off and boiling her body parts alongside their dinner until only the bones were left. At one point during the dismemberment, Shing-cho shouted for Fong to come over, telling her, "Come here, take a look." Fong replied, "No, I'm scared," and Shing-cho simply told her, "Just pretend you're watching television." They threw the bones in the trash, but saved a few internal organs and a single tooth. Fan's skull was placed inside of a large mermaid Hello Kitty toy and sewn back together. As we mentioned at the beginning of this video, Fong turned up at the Yau Ma Ti police station with what the police believed was a tall tale about ghosts, murder and drugs from a young child. Fong explained to the officers that the ghost of Fan was haunting her and the only way she knew to get rid of the ghost of the woman she watched die was to confess to her part in the crime and ensure Fan received justice. The police organized a manhunt to find the 3 men Fong implicated. After going to the Shopper's Paradise apartment and finding the partial remains of Fan, police immediately got to work to track down Manlok, Shing-cho, and Wai-lun. Manlok was picked up a few streets away from his apartment while enjoying dim sum at a local eatery. As he turned to leave, an armored vehicle came to a screeching halt in front of him as dozens of armed police burst out, grabbing Manlok and securing him in the back of the vehicle. Shing-cho and Wai-lun were arrested later that day, and the 3 men were brought to Yau Ma Ti police station for questioning, where Fong was being held. The 3 men told police a similar story, that the only crime they had committed was operating an illegal brothel out of the apartment. They told detectives that Fan was a willing participant and cited her previous years as a sex worker as proof of this. The men told police that Fan had died as a result of an accidental overdose, and that they concealed her death to avoid trouble with the police. But the police weren't buying it. The Hello Kitty trophy, the boiled bones and the organs in the freezer were indicators that these men had committed acts of unspeakable evil against the 23-year-old. And they had Fong's testimony to prove it. In pre-trial proceedings, all 3 men were interviewed by several psychiatrists, in case they tried to plead insanity as the reason behind their crime. Each man was deemed fit to stand trial. Before the trials began, Ah Fong was offered full immunity by the courts in exchange for her testimony. She accepted and proceeded to testify against the 3 defendants, detailing each and every heinous act that was committed in the month-long torture of Fan. The trials of Chang Man-lok, Liang Shing-cho, and Liang wai-lun lasted 6 weeks. During the proceedings, each of the men tried to pin the blame on one another, none of them accepting guilt for their role in Fan's death. Their defense team worked overtime and almost convinced the jury that Fan had died of a drug overdose rather than torture, bringing up her past history to defame her. Fan's ex-husband took the stand and told the court she had come off drugs since having their son and was working to improve her life. Medical evidence was presented during the trial, but since Fan had been dismembered and boiled, they couldn't determine her exact cause of death. As a result, the jury was unable to say without a doubt that these men had killed Fan. The jury decided that regardless of how she died, or who had the biggest role to play, all of them would take accountability for her death, finding each of them guilty of manslaughter and unlawful imprisonment. Each of the 3 men received life sentences with the possibility of parole after 20 years, which would be in the year 2020. After the trial was over, the apartment where Fan had been killed was put up for sale. For years it stood empty, with nobody willing to buy or rent the property. When tenants in other apartments in the same building moved away, no one moved in to replace them. By 2012, the building was demolished by an investor and rebuilt in 2016 as a hotel. After a successful appeal, Liang wai-lun's sentence was shortened to 18 years. Liang Shing-cho was released early at some point, because in August of 2022, he was convicted of indecent contact with his friend's daughter, a 10-year-old. During his sentencing, the magistrate stated that what he did was beyond giving the young girl a massage, and that he took advantage of the trust of the victim. The 18-year prison sentence he served for Fan's murder obviously did not rehabilitate him. Now 48, Shing-cho was sent back to prison for 1 year. While there's no public information regarding which prison any of the 3 perpetrators were sent, nor any additional parole or release information beyond what we mentioned for Shing-cho, life in a Hong Kong prison will typically involve either cell or dormitory type layouts. For the cell layouts, the typical size of a cell is between 60 and 90 square feet, or the size of a very small bedroom in a home, and includes uniform furnishings. The dormitories vary in sizes, and typically accommodate 10 to 60 inmates, with rows of metal-framed bunk beds, a set of cubbyholes for prisoners' personal items, and very little else. The only means of elimination hygiene available to prisoners in many of Hong Kong's older prisons is a bucket, since toilets are not frequently utilized. The majority of Hong Kong's jails feature the dormitory-type layout, with the exception of the maximum security facilities for males. All convicts, including those being held awaiting trial, are generally given standard liberties, including daily showers, requirements to stay clean-cut with short hair, and they receive a wide variety of well-balanced meals. Thanks for sticking with us through all the hard-to-hear details. We hope this video did justice to Fan. This was definitely one of the more brutal cases we've covered. For us, the issue that came up a lot was related to Ah Fong, the young girl who exposed the crime to police but was fully immersed in the crime herself. It was easy to assign equal blame to her, given her involvement, but is that fair? Should the fact that she was young and impressionable and had virtually no parental guidance be considered? Are the real perpetrators the 3 men, or should she be to blame as well? Let us know your opinion in the comments. And if you want to see more videos like this one, please be sure to hit like, and definitely hit subscribe so you never miss a single video. We've got several cases coming up you definitely won't want to miss.